front typically. So on this one, I said, I'll pay for it up front. If you decide to go with someone else, then you'll just reimburse me for the cost of the appraisal. And then I gave him a heads up. Is this just on the screen, Angelina?
Yes.
Okay.
You can move it. You should be able to minimize it too. Sometimes.
Like Zoom is on this, like it's
Yes.
okay.
You're good.
It's not staring at me like right there.
No,
Okay.
sharing the screen.
Who are you letting in on Zoom? Who did you let in on Zoom? Did you you put her on there? Thank you. Okay.
So Mike came in, he appraised this one at 785, but when you're comprising a CMA, looking at it from the eyes of an appraiser is going to make an impact of how you go through and start doing CMAs, at least with how I do it for the Fedie group. So when we do our CMAs, these are common adjustments, if I can spell adjustments, that Fedie group makes when we're going through and doing a CMA. These I've compiled over the years of seeing different appraisers. That's why there's typically some ranges when it comes through. So when you look at an appraisal, they're going to have the subject line and then 3 comparables when it goes through. So you'll see that this is the subject property that he was comparing it to with the 3 different comps. So when you start looking at line items, so site is the amount of square footage, or the square footage of the property, square footage of the living area, basement grade, if there's any garages, the amount of fireplaces, things along those lines. So for example, if we take the comparison to the first comparable right next to each other, so the subject had 3 fireplaces and the comp only had 1. So Mike Wilbanks made a $10,000 adjustment for the fact that this comp only had 1 fireplace versus ours. So if you think about it, he added, the logic behind it is if this house had 3 fireplaces like the subject property, it would be valued $10,000 more to the market. So that's where these adjustments start coming into play. So ours had a 3-car garage, the comp only had a 2-car garage. So he made a $10,000 adjustment for the fact that the comp only had a 2-car garage. So that's why garages, I've seen an appraiser make anywhere from $7,500 to $10,000 per bay, meaning like a 2-car versus a 3-car. That'd be a difference. Square footage, this one was about 1,800 square feet smaller. So he made $125,000 adjustment. That was on the higher end of the $40 to $55 per square foot. Same thing with the basement square footage. So this one had 2,000 square feet finished versus 0 square feet finished. Made a $28,000 adjustment. So that's about a $14 a square foot adjustment for the fact that it was a finished basement. So apples to apples, if this one were the same exact finishes and on paper the same, it would have sold for $205,000 more. So if we look at the 3 different comps, this comp in theory would have sold for $865, this comp would have sold for $768, and this one would have sold for $785. So typically I've seen appraisers kind of do the average of those. I've seen them do the median of those. But Mike ended up appraising it somewhere in the center at $785 for this one in particular.
Did you have a conversation with him beforehand about what he thought was going to go?
I did not. And I did that on purpose because I wanted his unbiased opinion. So when I did my CMA, when I first did this listing appointment, my CMA came in around 715 to 735. Did I fully agree with Mike's 785? Not necessarily. I thought it was a little high. And I say that because I sold this comp on Joseph. That's actually how I got this listing appointment on Thorn. And we had it listed at 750, which I knew was high, but it actually appraised at 660. So I kind of got screwed over a little bit on the appraisal for Joseph. Conversation for a different day. But so that's why he was putting more emphasis on mine. And I don't think apples to apples, it would have been jumping it up that high. But no, I purposely did not have a conversation with him to try to skew it. Bill, I'll use you as a role play partner. Okay. So these clients, once they saw the appraisal, they wanted to list at 839. So that's something. So I run into it most times than not. Like if a CMA comes in at 750 and they want to list at 800 to be like, hey, give us room for negotiation. So pretend you're the seller that wanted to list at 839.
All right, Todd, I appreciate you doing that. I told you were wrong on your number. But even though I still feel like we slept on it and prayed about it and it's all 839.
So I totally appreciate that. That is the whole reason why I got the appraisal done, because I wanted the expert to come in and give the valuation. So I'm glad that it came in higher than where my numbers came in at, because that's ultimately going to be a better benefit to you. Now, what is your logic behind wanting to list at 839 versus what it appraised at?
So I think for us, it's the view. We love having coffee in the morning outside, watching the sunrise, and it's just so peaceful back there. I mean, you can't get $15 million.
Absolutely. And I would totally agree. I mean, you guys did the fire pit and everything outside. You made it gorgeous. Now, let me explain to you why I think that might be a bigger negative impact to you guys versus listing a little bit lower. I think that with it being appraised at 785, I don't think it would be necessarily a bad idea to start at 799.9. And I say that because there's going to be some negotiations in this price point, especially in the higher interest rate market that we're seeing right now. So even if we list at 799, if we get an offer at 775, we can counter back at 785, and I can use this appraisal as justification. However, if we started listing too much higher, like at 839, I think we're going to run into issues with, if we start getting contracts over that at that significant amount. I think that regardless, if we already had one appraiser that's saying 785, the next appraiser is going to be close to that. So I think that if we necessarily list a little bit higher, I think we might sit on the market for a little bit longer, especially because we already have an appraisal at 785. That's what he's thinking the market's going to be at. So right now, we're not necessarily in a market to where buyers are coming in $100,000 below asking, and we're negotiating up from there. So days on market is going to be a very negative impact for you guys, because the longer it's on the market, people are going to start wondering what's wrong with it. And that's ultimately going to result in potentially a lower sales price in the appraisal for you guys. So that's where, if you guys wanted to leave room for negotiation and take into account room for the view, I would suggest listing at 799 to give me about a $15,000 gap to negotiate to where you guys are still comfortable selling at the appraised price.
Makes a lot of sense. We appreciate it. Hopefully, allowing us to go a little bit higher.
So they wanted to start at 840. And I got to the point with the husband where I told him I was not listing his house above 800. I kind of gave him the ultimatum. I said, you can list with someone else at 840, but it's not going to be with me. And they ended up taking my listing with it. But I had to get to the point with the seller where I told him flat out, like, I'm not listing your house at 840. It's going to be a waste of my time. It's going to be a waste of your time. And so the house, they weren't listening to my suggestions for a little bit. Finally, they did. We did an open house. We ended up getting a buyer under contract, but we just got under contract for 775. So the initial conversation that I had with them, that the longer it sits on the market, the first question that agent asked that we just got under contract with is, why is it still on the market? Because we listed it too high and they weren't negotiating back and forth. So, yeah.
I've never done an appraisal on the front end. Have you, let's say, people's in the contract and the lender's appraisal comes in lower than what you had it appraised for? This appraisal off, can you do on the front end say, we said appraisal is what this appraiser said?
So when it comes to appraisals on my listings, I am blocking out showing time to where they're forced to call me to schedule. And I do that intentionally because I'm showing up to all my appraisals and I'm making sure that appraiser's happy and well-informed, because there's nothing better than a happy and well-informed appraisal when it comes to it. So that's one of my value propositions for me and the team, is I'm meeting the appraiser there. And what our pre-appraisal packages look like is it's literally just a cover page that we've created on Canva. There's a list of upgrades with the approximate costs. So like any big ticket items, roof, brand new kitchen, stuff that the appraiser wouldn't necessarily see just walking through, that make an impact on the appraisal. So if we look at Mike's appraisal. So improvements and comments. There's a section in the appraisal and it says subject property was built in 97 and constructed and finished with premium materials throughout. First floor primary suite. The finish trim throughout the house is exceptional. Gas fireplace with custom built hearth and surround. Exterior home is all brick. All these items are what I included in my pre-appraisal package to him. So what I handed Mike was solely a cover page and a list of upgrades because I wanted him to use whatever comps I potentially wasn't seeing. So our pre-appraisal package is a list of upgrades with the appraisal, like approximate cost, age of them, and then a list of comps. So what I do in this situation is, so for example, when this appraisal comes up on Thorn and we're through this, I'm gonna print off this entire appraisal and I'm gonna be handing it to the guy. Now, if I didn't have this appraisal, and let's say I picked these 3 comps that Mike would have, I print off the MLS sheet and everything that is inferior on the comp, I'm taking a highlighter and I'm highlighting it. So for example, with this one, I'd be highlighting the square footage and I would put smaller. I would highlight the fact that it was unfinished basement. I would highlight the fact that it was a 2-car garage. And I do that intentionally because I want to make sure that the appraiser is seeing those and making the proper adjustments for it to get the valuation that we need. When we start getting under contract with multiple offers and it drove the price up, for example, my listing on Kenrich where we ended up getting 6 offers, it went for 15,000 above asking. I was stretching with where the comps were going to be pushing at. But what I did was I took the 3 highest offers that we had, whited out the buyer's name, and I said, hey, I have 3 offers at 225. Comps might not be demanding this, but the market is. So not only did I do my comps, but I whited out the buyer's info on the offers and said, hey, I have 3 qualified buyers right now that just offered the same amount.
Did you give comps in that situation?
I did. Still in addition to it. Yep. I went out further and got a little more creative with them. So I found comps. So I ended up going out 2 miles for that one instead of 1 mile. And I started justifying it because the further I went out, the more specific I got to justify that price. So, yeah, so it's just taking into account when it comes to CMAs and whatnot, even when you're meeting with sellers and or just doing preliminary pricing, we do it as if we're getting ready for an appraisal and seeing what it's approximately going to come in at. So when it comes to, I'll just show you a quick one. So when we're going through our pricing suggestion, we're not just doing like the average of the comparables. We actually go through, I know Flex is a little bit different, but in Real Comp, you guys might be able to, if you're still using Real Comp, in the CMA section, there's going to be an adjustments tab that you can add on to your report. So right here, for example. Now this one's never been listed, so we were getting a little, like we didn't put any adjustments in here. So if we start looking at this, when we did our CMA, the comparable price and the adjusted comparable price are the exact same right now. So let's just say the average is 448. But if we started going through and full bath, 4,000 to 6,000, I typically just type in 5,000 for that. Half baths, 2,500. And then it starts auto-populating it. So you literally just have to put the number up at the top. Start going through garage, come to find out it did have a garage. So, and it ended up having a fireplace. So for this one, we're gonna add on $1,000. Fireplaces. And that's something that when we're doing our pre-appraisal package, we're highlighting the fact that it has a fireplace. So no garage, this one ends up having a 2-car garage. So we're gonna add on $15,000 for the fact that this has a garage. And then same thing. So then we're gonna add on 7,500 for the fact that this one has a 1-car, but we have the 2-car. So we're making these adjustments in order to ultimately give our sellers the highest market rate that we're seeing about approximately right now. This one's waterfront. So typically in waterfront, I give a higher price per square foot difference. Let's just use the low grade 40 for right now. And acreage, when it comes to waterfront, I typically do a $10,000 adjustment per acre on that. You can get into details with price per foot of frontage on the water, something along those lines. But when it goes through, it then changes from 448 to 456. So that's another $12,000 that a seller might have just missed out on if you didn't make those adjustments to the comparables that you were using. Now, disclaimer, we are not appraisers. These are not everywhere guidelines. Let's make that very clear. I've seen Redford, I get $1,000 adjustment for a house in Redford. So these are pretty common for Livingston County. But obviously different markets are going to command different adjustments. For example, like Redford, we just had an appraisal that came back last year and we got $1,000 adjustment for a full bath. And I think it was $15 per square foot. So it really depends on the area, but Livingston County is about the same. Oh, you're good. I do not make an adjustment for bedrooms unless you're going from a 2-bedroom to a 3-bedroom. That's something I actually learned from Mike Wilbanks. When he is doing an appraisal on a 2-bedroom house, he has to do at minimum 1 comp that has a 2-bedroom. So if he has to go out 10 miles for that 2-bedroom comp, he has to use at minimum one 2-bedroom comp, and then he can take a 3-bedroom comp and adjust down. And he said, if you're doing that for a 2-bedroom subject property, it's anywhere from a $5,000 to $10,000 adjustment. I typically don't make an adjustment for that. Yeah, that's personally what I've seen. I ran into that a little bit with the listing I had on Morning View, that fact that it was 3 bedrooms up and 1 bedroom down. But I didn't make any adjustment because there was a lot of comps that were 5 bedrooms. I didn't make any adjustment for the fact it was 4. Do you have some?
Todd, when you have a subject and you get and sit down and begin the process, what are you?
For comps?
Yeah.
Well, let's start.
Like
Whose house can I pick on?
pick your neighbor's house.
We'll just do my house, actually.
I know it's not in the sub, right?
Yep. This was my house prior to addition, so we will change this. But let's go to, well, we'll just create a CMA on my house. Little name on there. When it comes to pages on a CMA, I have my defaults as this. There's a lot of, I guess, fluff pages that a lot of sellers, at least in my opinion, don't necessarily care about. These are the primary ones that I make sure to focus on in our listing presentations. Days on market, price adjustments, list price versus sales price, and the map layout. One tab that I've been adding lately that kills our printer costs, but is really beneficial when you're in a listing appointment is the additional photos. And I do that intentionally because if they say, well, that comp didn't have a finished basement, I flip through to the photos and I'll be like, they did have a finished basement. It had a wet bar. You know, you can handle that objection right then and there. So like our CMAs might be 40, 50 pages, but typically that's really helpful for a seller to go through and take a look at those pictures too. We'll go through, we'll find the listing that you want to use. And then I'm going to change this up just because my information has changed on this. So another thing, when I'm getting ready to do, like if we have a listing appointment and we're doing a CMA, typically when I'm on the initial phone call, I ask them if they've done any upgrades, any additions, is their basement finished? And I try to get that information up front. And then another thing that I do is I typically go on BSNA and I look up their house and try to get as much information, especially if it hasn't been listed before, beforehand on that. Yeah. Just to make sure, like I'm not going in, like, for example, this listing appointment, like if I was listing my own house and public records said it was a 2-bed on 80 acres, when realistically it's a 3-bed on 2.5 acres because it's been split, you then look like you don't know what you're doing when you're going into the listing appointment. And then I typically get rid of old listing information when you're going through. So when I look for comparables, I try to start as close as I can and then work my way out if I'm not liking what I'm finding. So I always do it as a map search to begin with. And I typically, in my situation, I know my house is in the country, so I'm going to start within a mile. If it's within Hidden Lake, I'm only going to go within a half mile because I know it's typically going to be within that neighborhood. So let's start off within a mile. I'm going to look at sold, pending, ABOs, and actives within the past year. I want sales. I want residential houses. So right off the bat, we have 6 matches. So before I do any other criteria, I'm going to look at these 6 and see kind of what we're working with these 6 first. I'm sure we've all seen this listing. So this one was actually one of my neighbor's houses. She died before she finished building the house. So this house, if you start looking at the pictures, it's brand new construction and it's literally not finished yet. No garage doors, no nothing. So I'm not going to compare this partially new built house to mine. So that's a comp that I would skip. Now this house on paper, some of the first things I'm looking at is the square footage similar? Is the property similar? And is the year built similar? So with mine being built in 1950 with an addition being done in 2023, 1968, that's something that I would say was within reason. I typically go about 25 years front or back. And then the newer it gets, probably within the past like 10 years. So a house built in 2016, I'm probably looking at comps that are 2005 and newer. So get a little more stringent. So on paper, pretty similar square footage, a little more property. That's something you can adjust down. And then built 1968. So we'll look at this one. So this one, just knowing my house, I can already tell you, I actually looked at this house to buy for myself. It was pretty dated. However, this is a comp that I would use and simply adjust up for the fact that this one's outdated versus mine that's updated. So you can see that just about every room in this house needs to be touched. So I would just make an adjustment and point it out to my sellers that this house is outdated, but it's still sold for $360. So you can always adjust up. So typically you want to find a comp that's superior, inferior, and comparable. So I'll use that as my inferior comp. It's also one of my neighbor's houses that I sold. This one I would pull up as a comp, but I wouldn't place as much emphasis on it for the fact that it's smaller, it's a lot newer, a little less property, and the fact that it's not a ranch. Typically when I'm doing a CMA on a ranch, I try to stick with ranches because they cost more to build and they typically command a higher price. So this one I would use as a comp, but I wouldn't place as much emphasis on it. And the reason why I would use it as a comp is because on paper, it's pretty similar. You have similar finishes and you can make the slight adjustments. However, I'd put more emphasis on a ranch comp versus a story and a half. This comp is almost dead similar to my house. So you got 150 less square feet within 2 years of it being built, a little more property. You got the attached garage, similar finishes. It's updated throughout. It's got the fireplace, nice kitchen. So just looking at these couple pictures, I would know that I would be using it as a comp.
How many are you trying to get in front of your sellers?
Minimum of 3.
Okay.
So in this situation, I have the 3 checked. I would try to find 3 ranch comps. So this one, it's newer, it's on 14 acres. It's decent size, but it's a 2-story. I would not use this one as a comp. And I say that just because of the square footage and the property size. I wouldn't want to make an adjustment from the 14 acres that this one has down to the 2 acres that I have. Because typically, if you're looking at properties that are 10 or more acres, they have options for horses and a lot more potential. So I would not use that one as a comp. This one, I wouldn't use as a comp either, even though it's a ranch. It's 800 square feet smaller and it's a hell of a lot newer. So even though it's right down the road, this isn't necessarily a comp that I would use either, just because of those two things. I feel like the adjustment would be too much adding on to the sales price to make it a difference. So I'm gonna add the 3 that I got. And then I'm gonna go back into adding listings, and instead of 1 mile, I'm gonna go out 2. So that brought up 37. So I'm gonna look at houses that are 1+ acres to get rid of the subdivision ones. And that dropped us down to 16. So if we start looking at, well, let me go back because I already have 2 ranch comps. I want to find the third one. So we're just looking at ranches. That brought us down to 10. So that just got rid of us looking at 6 comps that we didn't need. Another listing down the road for me. I would not use this one just because of the square footage and the fact that this house was super bogue on the inside. Oh, this house was disgusting. Crumb Rise actually sold it for us. Again, Musson wouldn't use that one. We looked at that one. This isn't one that I would use either, just because of the newness of it, comparing it, and then just knowing it's in a subdivision versus mine that's not in a subdivision. So I wouldn't use this one as a comp. Again, same reason. It's in the same sub.
Right now, like in your head, do you have a number in mind? Or are you waiting for that? No.
Like for my house personally, or like when I'm doing CMAs? Not necessarily, not until I do the adjusted price. I would say I have a range when I'm looking at it. Like I had a listing appointment on the Chain of Lakes on the Portage Canal, and it was a 2,000 square foot 2-story. So I knew that one was going to be in the 550 to 750 range.
Okay. And
then my CMA came in at 642. So it was kind of dead set in the middle of the range. This is a comp I wouldn't use just based on the fact that it's on Highland Road and the fact that it's so much newer. However, this one I would. And I say that because square footage is almost there. The property is almost identical. And it has the same, little bit newer. But based on everything else, if we start looking at the photos on this one, it's gonna have similar finishes. So this is probably the third ranch comp that I would use.
Would you ever make an adjustment for gravel or spade?
Roads? Depending on the area that it's in. Not necessarily like too much of an adjustment. Now, when it gets down to multiple offers and I'm trying to nitpick on value, when I'm highlighting my listings, that the comps that I used, if my house has a paved driveway and the other one has a gravel driveway, I'm pointing that out. If my comp has vaulted ceilings and the other one does not, I'm pointing out the fact that mine has vaulted ceilings. If the other house is on propane and ours is on natural gas, I'm pointing that out. Anything that could be seen as a negative to a buyer that would add value to your house is what I'm pointing out to the appraiser. So I got the comps. I look at the map real quick, just making sure that everything's mapped out in the spot it should be. So then if we start going through the adjustments, the only adjustment that I would make in the bedrooms, for example, would be the fact that this was a 2-bedroom, comparing it to a 3-bedroom. I would add on that $10,000 valuation for that I was talking about earlier. Full baths, just type in 5. Half baths, type in that 2,500, so it automatically makes the adjustments for you. All of them have central air, so we're good there. Fireplace, I still don't have a fireplace, so I'm going to subtract off some money to the other ones. My house was on 80 acres originally. The guy that bought it split mine off, sold 10 acres on the corner and built his house on 62 in the back. So that cow farm that I back up to is a part of an estate for the house that my dad built for the guy. Yeah. Oh, yeah. He's got like a mile long driveway. His house, he's got like 2.2 million into it. It's nuts. He's got a private lake. Yeah. So he put like a fishing house on that lake and everything, and he goes ice fishing out there all the time. He got a little pontoon boat to throw on there. The house on Musson that was dated, that we pulled as a comp. So that house came on the market 2 days after I got the C of O for my addition. And I'm like, I'm just gonna go look at it. Like, I just want to look at it. And so I went and looked at it, and all I saw was the view of the lake, the property. I'm like, I could fix this up. I go and I'm like, hey, Brian, like, it was date night. So I'm like, let's go take a look at it. And he's like, okay, we'll go look at it. You stepped 1 foot in this house. He's like, I would divorce you in 2 seconds if you made us go through another renovation. And I almost vetoed him. I almost vetoed him on it. Stunning. Absolutely stunning. I had big plans for that house in my head. Huh? No, it was wide open. I struggled with the crackhead neighbors in front of that house.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Yeah, it was rough going back there. It was some rough house.
the neighbors were not, yeah. So the fact that these basements aren't finished, just for all intents and purposes, let's just add a $5,000 adjustment because I only have 450 finished in my lower level. So if we start looking at pricing, if I were to list my own house, I would say, hey, you're probably going to be in the 390 to 393 range. However, I don't think there would be any objection to price at 399.9 to still hit under that 400 mark.
That how, so do you, when you put that in front of them, are you just being the pro and telling them what you think, or are you explaining anything? Or
So
just jump right into it?
let's role play it. So we're sitting down, we're going through everything. I'm saying this house on, here, let me look at it. As if I'm, because what I do is I have this printed off and I'm literally flipping it around and I'm reading it upside down to them. That way they're actually seeing the numbers in front of them. Sometimes it gets a little challenging to read it upside down. I don't show them the page, however, we go through them. So when you generate the CMA, this will load. I typically jump right to the second page and I say, we had a house on Musson that sold at 360. That one was super dated. I think that we need to focus on these 2 comps on Brophy and Clyde. One of them sold at 375. It was 1,900 square feet on 4 acres. There was another one on Clyde that sold at 405. It was 1,800 square feet on 2 acres. If we take into account the adjustments that an appraiser, this is like almost word for word what I say. If we take into account the adjustments that an appraiser would make to make your house apples to apples to these 2 comps, it's going to place us in the range of 390 to 393. Now, I would suggest listing at 399.9 because there's not too much of a difference in people looking at a house that's 390 to 399.9 because they're looking in $25,000 increments. So if they're looking up to 400, they're going to be seeing your house, whether it's listed at 390 to 399.9. It's not going to have that much of an impact. However, for example, if this came in at 377, I would suggest listing at 375 and give them the mentality of people are looking in $25,000 increments. We're going to hit more of the buyer pool hitting 375 versus hitting 400 and looking overpriced. So that's how I'm wording it and kind of explaining the search criteria. And I'll even ask them, I'll be like, when you were searching for your house, were you looking in $25,000 increments? And they're like, oh yeah, I was. So then the increment starts looking a little different. If they start going into, well, that house on Clyde had 2 bathrooms or however much property, I then pull up these pages that have the price adjustments listed out. And I said, if your house was apples to apples with the one on Clyde, you'd be at 421. And then if your house was apples to apples with the one on Brophy, you'd be at 378. So if we cut that number in half, that'd be the 400 mark that I'm wanting to hit for you guys. And then typically they don't have too much objection. The biggest key to it that just going on so many listing appointments is you have to sound confident in your numbers. You can't say, well, I think we can get 390, but there's no harm in trying 400. You got to sound confident, sound like you had it practiced, and that you're sticking behind that number that you want to tell them. Now, if they say, like just handling an objection of, well, we think that we want to list at 415, I'll tell them, I don't think 415 is necessarily out of the realm. I think that it might harm you guys because I think that if we list at 400, there might be a chance that we might get multiple offers. However, if you're dead set on listing at 415, let's try it for 2 weeks. We're going to have the most activity that we're going to see within the first 2 weeks. And the market's going to tell us if we're too high at 415. If we list higher than what my suggestion is, I will put it into the listing contract that in 2 weeks, we're going to reduce the price down to $399. And I write that in my listing contracts and I have them sign it to where in 2 weeks when their house isn't sold, I'm then not struggling to get a price reduction done. So that's how I handle that objection. I tell them the negative consequences of what that might happen, but then set a deadline as to when we're going to stop trying that. And then all the way at the end is where we start going through the pictures. And all these pictures are included in the CMA.
Do you go that far if you have, if you don't have to?
Do I start flipping through the pictures? No, not if I don't have to.
You don't even get there unless you have.
Yep.
Okay.
But I have them in my back pocket in case I need them.
You won't even explain like, I mean.
Nope. Calm, cool, and confident. I would say of the past, like last year with all the listings that we had, I probably only had 2 sellers that objected the price point that I told them to go in at.
Really?
One objection that I was getting with those 2 people last year was, well, Zillow says my house is worth 450. So typically what I do when I'm preparing my CMA is for shits and gigs is I will go on Zillow and see what this estimate is. So for example, that house on Thorn that just appraised at 785, this estimate on it, 605. So that's kind of a bad example because it was lower than what we ended up listing at. But, you know, for example, like we just went on a listing appointment probably about a month ago and she was like, she texted me last week. She's like, well, is now a good time? I told her 425. She's like, Zestimate just jumped up to 460. And my reply to that was, well, let me send you updated comps. It's been a month. Let me see why Zillow jumped up. And it was because of one of the new builds that was sold at 600. And I told her, I'm like, Becky, your house isn't comparable to a new build. And then once she realized the information that I sent her, she's like, oh yeah, that's incorrect. I'm trying to think. Any questions? I know I kind of just went over a whole bunch of numbers. Minimum of an hour going through everything. So I start off with, when I go through my listing presentations, we have our binder with everything in there that they get to keep. I always have blank listing paperwork with the date filled out so that in case they want to sign, we're signing right then and there. Less of a chance for them to interview other agents or second guess their decision that they're about to make. And then you just look more confident, more prepared. But typically I start off and I say, hey, let's go on a tour. And during the tour, if there's any staging suggestions, I'll point them out while we're going through the tour. So typically they run through, tell me everything that they did, build some rapport. That's a really good time to start asking the forward questions. Family, occupation, recreation, which is like things they like to do for fun and any dreams or anything that they have. So like once we get to the kids' rooms, I'm asking about their kids. When we get to the office, I'm like, what do you do for work? Stuff like that. Or compliment some of the upgrades that they did to start building that rapport. Staging advice. When I start going through staging advice, I don't do it as an insult. I give it to them as this is going to increase your marketability. One of the, who's got a listing on the market? All right, we'll look at one of mine. So I'll tell you what we did at this condo to stage it. So I have a very limited 5 bins was all I gave myself for staging inventory, and it cost me at most $300 to have the staging inventory. The seller we went through, and when I first did this listing appointment, I told him if you don't paint and don't change your light fixtures, you're looking at about a $450 list price, because they had gold light fixtures from 1994. They had trim that was all banged up. They had a cream color. Their ceilings were super discolored. It needed a fresh coat of paint. It hasn't been painted since 1994. I'm like, it needs to be painted. So they ended up changing every single light fixture. All I did was I sent them URLs from Lowe's and I said, order these light fixtures. These are what rooms they go in. Huh?
That's sweet.
Yeah, I sent him URLs. I said, these are light fixtures. Here's my electrician's number. He'll install them for you. So that light fixture we changed that light fixture. That was one of my pillows. That was something just as easy as jazzing up the foyer a little bit. Everything that was in here was theirs. They switched out that light fixture. That was one of my pictures that I ended up bringing. And I took the picture that was down there that was pink and had birds on it with a gold frame, and I moved it downstairs. And I did that because it's dated. And that was one of the first rooms that you walked in. Also, when I came here, they had clear round spindles from the 90s. So I had them take them all out. I told them what spindles to order, and the seller put them in. And all this trim was like bleached oak from the 90s. So they went through, the painter painted everything white. So they made an $8,000 investment in paint and a $2,000 investment in light fixtures, and it resulted in a $75,000 price difference. This, we rearranged the photos up here to add that up a little bit. The kitchen, we didn't really do much to. They had all those things up there originally. We just cleared off the countertops. Down here, we just added these pillows. They had them in their storage room. We just added them onto the couch. The biggest thing that I have in my inventory in the 5 bins, I literally just put them in space saver bags, and it is bedding from Walmart. That cost me at most $35 a piece. The biggest thing that I have is white pillows, white comforter, just brighten it up a little bit. So all I did was I took my great comforter, put it on, and I had my pillowcases that I put on their own pillows. And I tell my clients, when you package it up for me, when I come to grab it, just make sure it's washed and folded. And they typically have it ready for me. So that's all we did, was we just I told them I was strip your bedding. We'll come through, we'll put new bedding on. And then we folded up their own towels. We just rolled them up there. That was my centerpiece that we ended up bringing in. And then we had them switch out rugs, just to jazz it up. If I had my way on this, I would have brought in some more white. So I would have had them buy white area rugs just to jazz it up. This is like 90s tile. So I wanted to brighten it up a little bit, just make it a little more refreshed. And then up here, they had their grandson living with them. So again, this is all my bedding. That was actually a picture from my living room I took down to hang up there, but that's like one of my staging pieces that I use. But again, all this stuff I just bought from Walmart or like the at-home store in Wixom. I hit up their clearance section just about after Christmas when it's 90% off, and just little space saver bags. This couch, Maddie and I moved, nothing too crazy. This bathroom, we hung up all these towels, shower curtain. I bought that for probably 12 bucks at home with the shower rod hooks. They had a shower curtain that was just kind of dated and had the water stuff on the backside, but the difference between the white shower curtain and what we walked into, there was a window in that shower and it just made it so much brighter. So it made a huge difference. And then this basement, we ended up moving the couches around to create this living area. And then that was that ugly picture that was in their dining room that we ended up moving down. But just little stuff like that. Blanket they already had, we just threw it on there to make it look a little more cozy. And please, for the love of God, shut your toilet seats. That is like one of my biggest pet peeves I see in iPhone pictures that you see the agent in the mirror. Ping pong table, we literally just put the paddles out, just made it look ready. And then they requested pictures of the cranes and the deer in the backyard. Let me show.
So are you doing all that before photos or?
That one, we had photos at noon and I was there at 9. So let me show you a listing I actually took over last year. And this agent had it on the market for a couple weeks. They had 2 showings within like the 3 weeks. So state, like, it doesn't look too bad. Like, yeah, you got some bright colors. Like the house looks kind of dark. no dining room table. The kitchen looks all right, you know, in my opinion, the photos could have been a little bit better, but. So they called me when their house was still listed and I told them like, hey, I can't come over while your house is listed. Like, I can give you staging advice, but you know, I don't, like, I'm not stepping on any toes here. Well, they ended up firing their agent and called me back 20 minutes later and said, come on over now. Yeah. Yeah, so we ended up taking it over. So just in those couple rooms was primarily what we did. But like the photos are lighter. It doesn't look as dark. I had them take the slip covers off those, so it's not yellow chairs anymore. I bought these pillows on clearance and that white blanket from At Home for probably 20 bucks total. So I brought in the blues because I wanted the blue color to go throughout. And their previous agent told them to take this dining room table out and put it in the garage. And I said, why would your agent tell you to take a dining room table out? So I ended up buying these chairs from At Home because they were like, well, we didn't have any chairs. So I bought them from At Home. I literally stapled the receipt to the bottom of the chair and then I returned them when we were done. Like I spent $200 and then got it back 4 weeks later when we closed. Same thing in here. So like we rearranged their furniture a little bit, brought in some more whites, but the biggest thing that I try to do in bathrooms that makes a big difference, they had a purple towel there, the white towels, in their master. They bought all the white just to jazz it up a little bit, just make it a little bit brighter. One of my biggest tricks, same thing. So they had like a pink bedspread on here. I'm like, get something white, something with blue in it. The biggest trick that I do with bathrooms is hanging on Amazon. You can get a 90-inch shower curtain and they're probably about $15. But if you get the 90-inch versus the 72-inch, you can hang it to the ceiling and your ceilings just look super tall. So that's my biggest trick is I have a couple 90-inch shower curtains that we just hang to the ceiling. Those are my pictures in my staging inventory. And then they bought the white rugs. But I literally told the wife, I'm like, go to Target, white rugs, white towels. She spent $100 and we ended up getting it under contract in 5 days. So, but that's little staging tricks.
Trying to make me want to be better.
So yeah, she had it on the market for 20 and then we had it under contract with an 8. Yeah.
Give them CMA.
Right then and there. So I do the preliminary CMA. That's why I asked them when I scheduled the listing appointment, what upgrades they've done. I try to get as much info. If I'm in front of my computer when they call, I try to look up their house right then and there. And I say, hey, and I try to distract them, like asking about their family, like how did they get a hold of me, who referred them. So all in the background, I'm literally on PRD, like trying to hurry up and look up their house. And I say, hey, I looked up your house. Is your house still 2,000 square feet? Do you have a finished basement? Stuff like that. Or if I'm driving, I literally pull over and Zillow it really quick and see if there's any photos or anything like that. But I try to do it right then and there. And I do that because you can gauge, one, their seriousness, two, if they like that number. And then, like I said, I bring the listing paperwork right there. And then, so at the end of the appointment, when we go through things that we do, I go, well, I have listing paperwork here. If you guys are comfortable, we can fill it out now. Or if you want to talk about it, we can come back a different day and schedule a call. 9 times out of 10, they're signing the listing paperwork right then and there.
What do you do when you're surprised by what we tell you it's a finished basement? Either finished not very nicely or not high quality, it's the other way, or you put on and it's like finished to that.
I just make the adjustments while I'm there. So I use the range in the CMA that I use. So if I only made a $10 adjustment for basement square footage, I might, while I'm there, start calculating and say, hey, well, I think that we might be on the higher end of these comps because of your basement finish, or a couple of those different things. If work needs to get done, I got contractors and handymen on standby. I send them the contacts right there. And I say, I'll even call them right then and there while I'm at the table and say, hey, Craig, I have a basement that needs some trim work done. Can you come over this week? And like, yeah, I'll be over there Tuesday. Or for like example with Turnberry, like their deck needed to be redone and repainted. I told them, I sent them 3 painter contacts right there. And I said, this deck needs to be painted before pictures. So go ahead and start working on getting that scheduled. So just stuff like that. If floors are really bad, I'll throw a rug down. I don't want to seem like I'm hiding something. That's why I throw a rug down. or just creative staging. Like if you got a hole in the wall, throw a couch up against it. You know, stuff like that and disclose it. They'll find it at the inspection.
You encourage your clients to do like a lot of updates. I mean, like improvements in the house, like the one house, if you had a painting, you had a lot. I mean,
So with that condo, their new build isn't going to be done till June of this year, and I met them in September of last year. So I knew time was on their side, and I knew money wasn't an object for them. So going into that appointment, I knew like, hey, one, they had the money to paint. Two, I explained the benefit of it, and they trusted my advice on it. So not in all cases am I suggesting painting, but I do ask them, like, if there's nicks on the wall, I'll be like, hey, take a magic eraser, try to wipe off your trim, do stuff like that. And just explain it, hey, in the eyes of a buyer, if we get as much attention on this, like, let me pull up Stony Point for a second that we got under contract. Or actually Dover Crescent. This is an even better example. So this house, I didn't do a damn thing on the first floor. I was like, I can't pack up 90% of this guy's house, so we're just gonna list it as it is. His wife died. He was already having a struggle with it, but we got downstairs. You couldn't tell that there was green carpet because there was so much stuff like just scattered across the carpet. Same thing with his bar, like his bar wasn't cleared off. And this room, again, you couldn't tell that there was green carpet in there. So he had all the beds like pushed up against the wall, like mattresses, like the bed wasn't even put together. So Jose and I spent 3 hours, and I told him, I was like, hey, I know you're having a hard time with like your wife passing and stuff. Do you give us permission? We'll come get it fixed up for you. We'll put everything in storage bins. We'll organize it a little bit. So Jose and I literally consolidated the bins. They had all the bedding downstairs. We literally, there's no bed frames. These are literally just 3 mattresses stacked on top of each other that we threw multiple blankets on to make it look like sheets, and then threw some pillows on there. And he already had the headboards. They don't match, but we showed it as a bedroom in the basement versus a shit storage room. So no, those were all there. So we literally just consult, like half of them were half filled. So we just went through and like that, this situation was hard because it was all of his wife's clothes and like stuff that she bought. So I was like, Kevin, like it's been 6 months. Like he doesn't want to go through his wife's clothes. So that's something that we busted out 2 hours before photos, and he came downstairs and started crying and he was so excited. And I was like, this is why we do it, Jose. But it just makes a difference. And we ended up getting it under contract actually with Aaron's guy, Adi. Within 4 days, but he had an agent that he was previously looking at a condo with. Once he told her that he was listing his house with someone else, she said, well, I would list it at 250 and I would do it for 4%. And I said, Kevin, we can get 275 for your house all day long. So not only did we sign a contract at 6% when someone else offered to do it for 4%, we then got it under contract for $28,000 more than what the other agent said that they would. So with a great co-op. Who was calling me every 5 minutes down in Vegas. I'm like, dude, you're doing okay. Like it is. Yeah. I was like, I love it. But yeah, so for this one so he didn't take any of my suggestions when we started going through the listing appointment. I told him to touch up paint. I had this staged by my stager, so it was looking pretty good. After the first 2 showings, they both commented on the need for some touch up paint, and he wasn't listening until the 4th person came through and said the exact same thing. And then he's like, okay, I'll touch up paint. Sometimes it takes a seller just coming through. And even if if they don't listen to my suggestion and we start getting that feedback, I tell the agent to let the ball roll and just give me as honest feedback as you can. And I'm forwarding it over to my clients because sometimes they just have to hear that honest feedback.
You give great feedback.
Yeah, most times I do. Like, so Aaron's house on Brentwood, she had listed. I showed it twice. And I said, how honest do you want me to be on this feedback? Like, I got a couple suggestions. She was like, let it fly. And I sent this big old thing and she ended up getting it under contract, I think like 2 weeks after that, something like that. But like, she had a seller that was the exact same thing. They just had to hear someone that wasn't saying, it's just not for them, you know?
don't know what I'm curious that, then your parents' house.
Yep.
It's such a unique property.
Mhm.
Can you talk through how you price that? How you came up with that price for that property that's so unique?
I talked to 3 appraisers. And every appraisal I had at the beginning of this year, even if I did not know them, I was asking them about that. So I'll show you what the original listing was on my dad's house. This is my dad's house when he bought it. It was just the manufactured house. On 2 acres. Like it was nothing special. He had his barn that was unfinished. And green carpet, typical stuff. So now he built his house. And it's funny because the assessor over at Heartland, they were like, I would lose my job if we did this now. Because that house still has separate well and septic. He has a new well and septic for his new house. So this was a field back in the day and they built their house on there. So what I did to comp their house out was I separated the property. And I said, what would a manufactured house with a finished walkout basement and a 30 by 40 pole barn fetch? And what would a 2,600 square foot custom ranch with a fully finished basement fetch? And I combined the 2. So I put about 300,000 on this and about 925, 950 on this. And that's how I came to 1.25. Now, every appraiser that I've talked to, like I talked to Mike Wilbanks pretty extensively about this, and same thing with Tracy B. They gave me the range between 1.1 and 1.4. So just based on how custom my dad's house is. Like, if you guys come to the broker open house between 3 to 5 today, which I hope you guys do, I'll give you the sneak peek on the photos. But for example, so like my photographer walked in and he's like, you're listing this at how much? They did vinyl siding on purpose because if you put stone on your house, it's in a different tax classification for the township. So they purposely did vinyl siding to make it look as basic on the outside because they have $1.6 million into this property alone. So like my dad's a custom woodworker. That's all custom that he built himself. These are all Chelsea plain hardwood floors. Like they made it very period specific. Their baseboard trim, my dad had a custom knife made. He hand milled every piece of trim in the house. And then once it was done, he snapped the knife to where no one else would have the same exact trim as him. Yeah.
And we wonder where you get it.
Like all this wood was where the driveway was. It was trees that he cut down. He had custom milled into logs and then made it custom shiplap for his house. So every piece of wood trim in here, these kitchen cabinets in the kitchen alone, they're flat. They're inset cabinets to where it doesn't come out from the face of the cabinet, but then they're a raised panel. The kitchen cabinet and the appliance fronts alone in this kitchen were $160,000. Like it's the most expensive cabinet you could buy. And then like the fireplace, I thought it was stone. That's actually hand carved out mortar and hand painted and stained to make it look like stone, but it's not. Same thing with the brick. And then like that pantry door was from France in 1910. It was an old breezeway door, an old antique that they redid. That stained glass from 1920 that they put in the house. Like the pantry alone has its own farmhouse sink, separate fridge.
Am I getting the broken to a
Yeah, you guys haven't seen it. That's a Jack Daniels barrel that they literally spent $1,200 on getting the barrel and then they cut the back out in order to run the plumbing for the copper sink. But like none of this is real brick. It is custom troweled to make it look like brick. So the guy came through and like literally made it look like brick and then stained it. Like same thing with all the wood on the wall was all from the property. Like that surround came from a house in downtown Detroit that was tore down.
Did they agree with your pricing too? Or was there a lot of discussion on it?
My stepmom said, if you sell it for more than $1 million, I'll be okay with it.
There you go.
But like granite topped counters in the kiss, like this is her closet. This is my dad's closet with the custom wet bar and coffee maker that they got in there. This is their bathroom. So they got the clawfoot tub, but my dad's a custom trim carpenter. So like all the archways were all made in the pole barn. Same thing with the shutters. Laundry room. And this is the lower level. Like they got the kitchenette down there. It's all ceramic tiles with wood-like tile. So there's three bedrooms down here plus the workout room with the additional. They're adding on to their place in Gladwin and then buying a house down in Florida. So my dad won't stop working in the barn. And he's supposed to be retired. So my stepmom said, "You're making me sell the house." Yeah. She has a-
Making trim for your. listing,
Huh?
Or your whatever, your trim. Remember you were-
Oh, my fucking condo.
Yeah.
So when I was renovating my house, he put MDF in my house because I wanted certain trim. And then when I bought my rental condo, that was $90,000. He handmade solid hardwood trim for it. And I said, "Dad, there's something messed up with that." But I came to the condo one day and all my trim was gone. He's like, "We're just gonna redo it." I'm like, "Okay." This is her wrapping room. So like on the backside, she has all of her ribbon and stuff. But they put an island in here for her to wrap gifts. So there's like a wrapping room for office. And then this is the original house that they re-sided to look like the barn. So they took all the windows out in the front, added the sliding barn door to make it look like a barn from the outside. But then when you get inside, it's a full house.
Who stays in there?
No one. It was a storage house for all of our Hidden Lake stuff. We took 3 loads of dumpsters out of here and sold half of it. And but like, perfect. It has a full walkout basement. There's 4,000 square feet additional over on this house. So you got about 9,000 finished square feet, plus a 30 by 40 pole barn. It has water, separate furnace and AC, 3-phase power, concrete floors. It's fully insulated with wood paneling with a plywood on the outside. I did. Yeah, I did. I was like, "Christine, you got to be happy with it." So yeah, it's definitely a unique house, but like someone like multi-generational or whatnot, it would be perfect for like older kids that you don't want to see. So yeah, I think she's the only person on the planet that would spend 160,000 hours on kitchen cabinets.
Have a wrapping room.
And have her, oh, if you come and see it, it's amazing. It's amazing. So what you didn't see from that side, on the back side, she took an antique spice cabinet that had the dowel rods in it, and she put all of her wrapping ribbon through it, so where she could just pull it and cut it right there and wrap her gifts on the island. So yeah, 3 to 5, I will be giving you guys food and ample amounts of wine.
Todd, thank you for your time and doing such an awesome class for us today.
You're welcome. Ditto. I want to be you one of these days.
Are you doing something for the second study? And that's why we're having this screenshot? No, Heather, see, I'm for sure I had on. I wasn't barely see you. Yeah, it's like. You were there too. Yeah, your brow was black. I thought it was just like.